The recording from the King County Emergency Dispatch Center is 3 minutes and 12 seconds long. It begins at 4:14 p.m. on April 26. The voice on the other end isn't a neighbor or a panicked husband. It's an 8-year-old girl named Chloe. She doesn't scream, she speaks with a terrifying rhythmic precision. She says, "My mom is the patient now." We were playing hospital on the rug. I put the pink stethoscope on her chest to hear her heart, but her heart stopped making the thumping sound. It just started making a clicking sound in her throat. She looks like she's waiting for a train that isn't coming. The dispatcher asks Chloe if her mother is breathing. The child responds with a detail no one could have coached. She says, "No." Her eyes are open, but the manifest is gone. She's just standing still inside her body. That manifest is what Linh Phan used to call her life. As a senior logistics coordinator for the Port of Seattle, Linh spent 20 years ensuring that every container, every pallet, and every bolt arrived exactly when the schedule demanded. She believed in the system. She believed that if you followed the routing, you'd never be lost. But 8 days ago, the routing failed. The system collapsed. And what Linh saw when she stepped off the map of the living has forced her to rethink everything she thought she knew about authority, independence, and the price of going your own way.
In logistics, we have a term called latency. It's the delay between a command and the execution, the gap where things go wrong. That's what I remember first. The latency. My name is Lynn. I'm 41. My life was built on spreadsheets. I like knowing where things are. I like the chain of command. If the terminal manager says a ship docks at 5, it docks at 5. If the manifest says there are 400 crates of electronics, I count 400. I don't like surprises. I don't like variables I can't control. It was a Tuesday. I was working from home. My daughter, Chloe, she's 8, and she's already a perfectionist like me. She wanted to play hospital. She had this plastic kit. Everything was neon pink and lime green. She's the doctor, I'm the patient. Standard procedure. We were on the living room carpet. I remember the smell of it. We just had it cleaned, that synthetic soapy scent. I was lying back and she was being very serious. She took that little pink plastic stethoscope and pressed it against my chest right over my heart. She said, "Mommy, you have to be still. I'm checking your inventory." I laughed. I started to say something about how my inventory was just fine, but the words, they didn't come out. It felt like a bottleneck. Like a massive cargo ship had just turned sideways in the middle of a narrow canal. There was a sharp, cold pressure behind my ribs. It wasn't a heart attack. I know what those feel like from the safety manuals. This was different. This was a blockage, a pulmonary embolism. A piece of the system had broken off and drifted into the wrong pipe. I tried to take a breath, but the air was restricted, denied entry. I looked at Chloe. She was still holding the stethoscope to my chest. Her face went from focused to confused. Then it went to something else, something I hope she never has to feel again. I wanted to tell her it was okay. I wanted to give her the emergency protocol. Call your dad, press the button on the phone, but my nervous system was experiencing a total power out. My vision started to grain out like a bad monitor. The last thing I felt was the hard, cold plastic of that toy stethoscope against my skin. And then I wasn't on the carpet anymore. Look, I'm a coordinator. I'm used to looking at the big picture from a bird's eye view, and suddenly I was doing exactly that. I was hovering about 4 feet above the rug. I could see the back of Chloe's head. I could see her shaking my shoulder. I could see my own body, this person named Lynn, lying there with one hand curled into a fist. The pink stethoscope was still there. It had fallen to the side, but the earpieces were still in Chloe's ears. She was listening to a silence that shouldn't have been there. I wasn't scared. That's the part that bothers me now. I should have been terrified for my daughter. But it felt like I'd just been reassigned to a different department. I was looking at the situation and thinking, this is a major logistics failure. How do we get the patient to the ER? But before I could figure out the route, the living room started to dissolve. It didn't fade to black. It drifted. It was like a thick gray fog rolled in from the port, swallowing the sofa, the television, and eventually Chloe. I reached out. I tried to grab the plastic stethoscope as it disappeared into the mist, but I didn't have a hand. I was just a point of observation. The smell changed. It didn't smell like carpet cleaner anymore. It smelled like stagnant salt water, like the bottom of a dry dock that hasn't been cleaned in a decade. And then I heard it. It was a scratching sound, like thousands of pens moving across paper at the same time. Scribble, scribble, scribble. It was the sound of a billion manifests being filled out by hand. I was standing or existing in a place that looked like a loading bay, but it was infinite. It went on forever in every direction. There were no lights, just this sour yellow glow that seemed to come from the floor itself. And then I saw the containers.
In clinical medicine, the moment Lynn is describing is known as the transition phase of a near-death experience. Dr. Sam Parnia, a leading intensivist and researcher at NYU Langone, has documented hundreds of cases where patients in cardiac or respiratory arrest reported a sudden shift in perspective. What is striking about Lynn's account is the persistence of her professional lens. While many survivors describe a tunnel or a sense of peace, those who have undergone a sudden traumatic system failure, like a pulmonary embolism, often report a period of intense observation. They don't just see the afterlife, they attempt to categorize it. A 2014 study published in the journal Resuscitation followed over 2,000 patients and found that nearly 40% of survivors had a sense of awareness during the time they were clinically dead. Lynn's description of the scratching pens and the loading bay isn't just a vision. It is her brain's attempt to process a reality that sits entirely outside the manifest of human biology.
The containers weren't the clean, painted steel boxes I see at the port. They were rusted. They were pitted with salt and age. They were stacked 30, 40, 50 high, stretching up into a sky that didn't have stars. I started to walk. I don't know how I was walking, but I was moving through the aisles of these boxes, and the sound of the scratching got louder. I realized it wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from inside the containers. I stopped at one. It was a standard 40-foot box, but the doors had been welded shut from the outside. There were no serial numbers, no shipping codes, no origin or destination marks. In my world, that's a ghost shipment. It doesn't exist. It can't be tracked. It's the ultimate nightmare for a coordinator. I put my ear, or whatever I was using to hear, against the metal. I heard a woman's voice. She wasn't screaming. She was muttering. She was saying, "I did it my way. I found my own route. I didn't need the dispatcher. I'm my own authority. I'm free. I'm free. I'm free." But she didn't sound free. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself while her breath was running out. And the whole time I could hear that scratching, like she was trying to write a new manifest on the walls of her own prison. I moved to the next container. Same thing. Another woman. This one was weeping. She kept saying, "They told me I didn't need the structure. They told me the rules were just suggestions." I thought I was empowering myself. I thought I was the one in charge. I felt this cold realization sink into me. It was a logistics problem I'd never seen before. These weren't shipments. These were people. And they were all stalled. They were all in a deadlock. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. As I looked down the long yellow aisles of that yard, I saw that nearly every container was filled with women. I could hear their voices overlapping into a single dissonant hum. It was a chorus of independence that had ended in a cage. I started to panic. I'm a coordinator. I fix things. I find the route. I looked around for a terminal manager. I looked for anyone in a vest with a radio who could tell me why the system had crashed this badly. Why were all these souls stuck in the yard? That's when I saw him. He wasn't wearing a vest. He didn't have a radio. He was just standing at the end of the aisle, near a stack of crates that looked like they were made of solid, unyielding light. He didn't look like the pictures in the Sunday school books Chloe brings home. He looked like the one who owns the port. He looked like the master dispatcher, the one who wrote the original manifest for every single atom in the universe. He looked at me, and I felt like a shipment that had been flagged for an audit. Everything I'd ever done, every route I'd ever taken without asking for permission, every time I told myself that I was the one who controlled my life, it was all there, laid out on a table for him to see. He didn't move. He just watched me. And in his eyes, there was this weight. It wasn't anger. It was the weight of a billion shipments that had gone missing. "Lynn," he said. My name didn't sound like a name. It sounded like a destination. It sounded like a coordinate on a map I'd never seen. He said, You spent your life tracking the routes of men, but you never looked at the route I built for you. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell him that I was a good person, that I worked hard, that I took care of Chloe. But as I opened my mouth, the gray fog behind me started to pulse. I saw a vision within the vision. It was the living room again. But it was different. I saw Chloe. She was still on the rug, but she wasn't playing anymore. She was holding the pink plastic stethoscope, and she was looking at the door, waiting for the paramedics to break it down. And then I saw the chain. It wasn't a metal chain, it was a line of code. A dark, flickering thread that started at Chloe's heart and went back through me, back through my mother, back through generations of women. It was a thread of rebellion, a thread that whispered, "You are the authority. You are the God of your own life. You don't need the design." Jesus looked at the yard of rusted containers. He looked at the souls trapped in their own self-made independence. He said, "This is what happens when the cargo decides to choose its own port. They think they are sailing toward freedom, but they are only sailing toward the yard of the stalled." I looked at the containers. I looked at the light coming from him. And then, for the first time in my life, I realized that I wasn't the coordinator. I was just the cargo. And I was very, very lost. I stood there. My feet, or the sensation of them, were pressed against that yellow vibrating floor. The scratching sound from the containers was like a headache that wouldn't quit. It was the sound of a billion pens trying to rewrite laws that were already set in stone. I looked at the master dispatcher. I looked at Jesus. I'm used to authority. I'm used to the terminal manager, the port director, the federal auditors. You stand up straight, you show your paperwork, you account for every minute. But this was different. He didn't need my paperwork. He was the one who had issued it. I tried to use my professional voice, the one I use when a $3 million shipment is stuck in customs and everyone is screaming. I said, "Lord, I don't understand the backlog. Why are there so many? Why is the inventory mostly women? Is there a systemic error in the routing?" He looked at me. He didn't answer right away. He walked over to one of the rusted containers. It was the one where the woman was muttering about her freedom. He placed his hand on the metal. The scratching inside stopped instantly. He said, "There is no error in the routing, Lynn. The error is in the bypass." I didn't get it. I thought he was talking about my heart. The embolism. I said, "You mean the clot? The blockage in my lungs?" He shook his head. His eyes were like the deep water at the mouth of the harbor, dark, unfathomable, full of things that have been lost for a long time. He said, "I am talking about the protocol of the soul. I created a structure. I created a chain of command not for oppression, but for protection. Like a ship needs a captain, like a port needs a manifest, a life needs an anchor. But a voice has gone out into the world, a voice that tells the cargo it can be the captain, a voice that tells the women they are most powerful when they are most alone." I felt a crack in my chest, not the physical pain from the carpet, but something else. I thought about my office. I thought about how I'd always prided myself on being the boss, how I never needed anyone's help, how I looked at the word submission like it was a dirty word, like it was a sign of a failed system. Jesus looked at the endless aisles of containers. He said, "Look at the manifest of their hearts, Lynn. See what they chose." Suddenly, the metal walls of 3 containers became transparent. It was like looking through an X-ray. The first woman was young. She was beautiful. In her life, she had been a leader, a worship leader. I saw her on a stage, surrounded by lights, singing about God. But as the years went on, she started listening to a different dispatch. She started hearing that she was the one who defined her worth, that she didn't need to answer to a husband, a church, or a word that felt old-fashioned. I watched her life speed up like a time-lapse video. She started editing the Bible, taking out the parts that talked about her needing to follow a design. She called it empowerment. She called it finding her truth. Jesus said she thought she was optimizing her route, but she was just cutting herself off from the fuel. By the time she died, she wasn't worshiping him anymore. She was worshiping the idea of herself. She had become her own God, and a God cannot be cargo. A God cannot be saved. She was stalled. The second container held a woman who looked like she was perpetually waiting for a bus. She wasn't rebellious. She was just drifting. She lived by her feelings. If she felt like God was there, she followed. If she felt like the world had a better offer, she took it. She had no anchor, no fixed coordinate. Jesus looked at her with such sorrow, I thought I would collapse. He said, "Feelings are the worst dispatchers. They change with the tide." I gave her my word as a permanent manifest, but she traded the permanent for the temporary. She followed the fog, and now she is part of it. Then I saw the third container. This one hurt the most. She was a woman who had been broken. I saw her life in flashes. A man who was supposed to protect her had used his authority like a hammer. He had been cruel. He had been lazy. He had claimed to follow God while he was destroying everything around him. I felt a surge of anger. My logistics brain kicked in. I said, "That's not fair. That's a faulty unit. He broke the protocol first. Why is she here? Why is she the one in the container?" Jesus didn't look away. He said, "He will answer for his treason. His manifest is dark." But she let his failure become her excuse to reject my design. She looked at the broken man and decided the creator was broken too. She chose independence as a shield. But independence from me is a shield made of lead. It only makes you sink faster. I looked back at the transparent containers. I saw the common thread. It was the independence lie, the idea that being your own authority is the same thing as being free. In my world, if a truck driver decides he doesn't like the route and goes off-road, he's not free. He's a liability. He's gonna crash. He's gonna lose the cargo. I realized that's what I'd been doing. I'd been self-dispatching. I'd been telling myself that as long as I was a good person and a strong woman, I didn't need to surrender to anything. Not to a husband, not to a church, and certainly not to a king who demanded I step down from the throne of my own life.
In the world of global logistics, there is a concept called systemic integrity. For a port like Seattle or Singapore to function, every single participant, from the crane operator to the software engineer, must adhere to a shared protocol. If a single vessel decides to ignore the harbor master's coordinates because the captain feels a different route is better, the result isn't just a delay. It's a multi-ship collision that can paralyze the entire global supply chain. The narrator, Lynn, is perceiving a spiritual equivalent. She is seeing the independence movement not as a social shift, but as a catastrophic failure of protocol. The scratching pens she hears represent the logistics of deception, the endless, exhausting work of trying to manage a life that was never meant to be self-governed. This mirrors a documented pattern in NDE accounts from high-functioning professionals. They often perceive the afterlife through the law of their land. For a coordinator, hell is not fire. It is the ultimate, eternal deadlock, a place where the manifest is broken beyond repair.
Jesus turned to me. The yellow light of the yard seemed to grow dim, and the light coming from him grew blinding. It wasn't a soft light, it was a surgical light. It was the kind of light that shows you the rust on the bottom of the ship. He said, "The enemy is strategic, Lynn. He knows that if he can get the women to reject the design, the whole structure collapses. He doesn't come with a pitchfork, he comes with a mirror. He tells you that you are enough. He tells you that you don't need anyone to lead you. He tells you that your truth is the only truth that matters." I thought about Chloe, my 8-year-old perfectionist. I thought about the movies she watches, the songs she listens to, the teachers who tell her she can be whatever she wants, do whatever she wants, and answer to no one. I saw it then. The logistics of deception wasn't just for the people in the containers. It was a massive, coordinated campaign targeting the future, targeting my daughter. I felt a wave of nausea. I wanted to go back. I wanted to run into the living room, grab that pink plastic stethoscope, and tell her, "Chloe, don't listen. There's a master dispatcher. There's a route we have to follow." I tried to grab his hand. I said, "Lord, I have to tell them, my daughters. My sisters, they think they're winning. They think they're being empowered. They don't know they're just being moved into the yard. They don't know they're becoming stalled cargo." He looked at me with a tenderness that felt like it was pulling the clot right out of my lungs. He said, "Many will call it a mission of hate, Lynn. They will say you are against women. They will say you are an agent of the old ways." I didn't care. I've been called worse by truck drivers when their shipments are late. I said, "Let them say it. I've seen the containers. I've heard the scratching." He reached out and touched my chest, right where the toy stethoscope had been. He said, "I am sending you back to the carpet. But you won't be the coordinator anymore. You will be a witness. You will tell them that the yoke I offer is easy and the burden is light, but the yoke of independence, that burden will crush them for eternity. Then he showed me the second vision. The yard disappeared. The containers melted away, and suddenly I was looking at a massive, rusted shipping container with no doors. None. And inside, I could hear the sound of 1 billion ticking clocks.
Lynn's account presents a version of Jesus that is profoundly uncomfortable for the modern ear. We are used to a Jesus who is a life coach, someone who helps us achieve our goals and find our best lives. But the figure Lynn describes is an authority, a king who speaks in the language of manifests, protocols, and cargo. This creates a sharp tension. For many, the idea of submission or design feels like a regression into a dark past. But for Lynn, the logistics coordinator, she sees it as the only way to avoid the deadlock. The friction here is between the modern truth of the self and the ancient truth of the creator. One side sees freedom as the absence of rules. The other, as Lynn is learning, sees freedom as the perfect alignment with the master's route. There is no middle ground in this account. Either you are the dispatcher or you are the cargo.
The ticking was so loud, it felt like it was shaking my very atoms. I looked at the container with no doors. Jesus said, "This is the future of those who follow the voice. They are building a prison without a manifest. They are running out of time, and they don't even know they've already been shipped." I saw the faces of little girls. Hundreds of them. They were holding tablets and phones, and their faces were glowing with that same sour yellow light from the yard. They were being fed the lie in real time, bit by bit, bite by bite, independent, strong, alone, stalled. I started to scream. I didn't have lungs, but I screamed with everything I was. I said, "No, open the doors, give them a new route." Jesus looked at me, he said, "The doors are only open while they still have breath. Once the manifest is signed at the end of the life, the route is locked." He pressed something into my chest. It felt like a leaden manifest, heavy, cold, final. He said, "Tell them to look at the master's route before the clock stops ticking." And then the light of his presence began to pull away. I was being sucked back into the gray fog. I was being pulled back toward the synthetic smell of the carpet and the synthetic pink plastic of the stethoscope. I didn't want to leave. Not because I loved the yard, but because I finally knew who the captain was. The last thing I heard was his voice. It didn't sound like a whisper. It sounded like a foghorn in the middle of a dead calm sea. "Lynn, the latency is over." Falling isn't the right word. In logistics, when a system crashes, there's this moment where the screens just freeze. The data stops moving. The little blinking cursor just sits there mocking you. That's what it felt like. I was stuck in the freeze. I was somewhere between the yard of stalled cargo and the living room carpet. I could still hear the ticking clocks from that doorless container. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the sound of 1 billion heartbeats, each one a second closer to the final audit. I was holding that manifest, the one he pressed into my chest. It wasn't paper. It felt like cold, heavy lead. It felt like every lie I'd ever told myself about being independent, every time I'd rerouted my own life without checking the master's map. It was all recorded in the weight of it. I saw the container again, the one with no doors. He showed me what happens when the latency ends. He showed me that the women who spend their lives building their own ports, their own truths, their own empires, they aren't just becoming strong, they are becoming isolated. They are building walls out of their own pride, and eventually the walls meet. They create a container with no exit. I saw the young girls again. I saw my Chloe. She was 8, but in this vision, she was 18, then 28. I saw her walking into a world that was screaming at her to be the captain, to be the boss, to never submit to anything. Not a man, not a church, not a king. I saw her getting everything she wanted, the career, the house, the independence. And I saw the rust starting to form on her edges. I saw her heart becoming a ghost shipment, moving through the world with no origin and no destination, just a unit in a yard. I tried to reach out to her in the vision. I wanted to hand her the leaden manifest. I wanted to show her the correct route, but my hand just passed through her like smoke. Jesus' voice was still in my head. It didn't sound like a memory. It sounded like a live feed. He said, "The world calls it empowerment. I call it a breach of protocol. You cannot be the dispatcher and the cargo at the same time. One will always destroy the other. I felt the pressure change. The air started to get thick. It smelled like that soapy carpet cleaner again. It was sharp. It was chemical. It was the smell of the living world, and it felt like it was trying to drown me. I heard a sound, a mechanical whine. Clear. The world didn't fade back in. It exploded.
Observe how Lynn processes the return to her body. She doesn't describe it as a relief. For a person whose entire psychological framework is built on logistics and control, the sudden, violent intervention of a medical team is the ultimate loss of agency. She is experiencing what psychologists call a narrator fracture. She refers to the medical intervention as a breach of protocol. She is struggling to reconcile the master dispatcher she just met with the clinical chaos of the paramedics. Whatever she experienced has fundamentally altered her relationship with the concept of authority. To Ling, the paramedics aren't just saving her life, they are resetting a system she no longer believes she owns. This psychological shift, from owner to witness, is a hallmark of survivors who have encountered a structured, authoritative afterlife rather than a generic void.
It was cold. The first thing I felt was the floor. The carpet was damp under my head. I think someone had spilled a glass of water. And then there was this electric burn in the center of my chest. My eyes snapped open. The light was too bright. It was that flat white LED light from the ceiling fan. A man in a blue uniform was leaning over me. He had a mask on. He was holding the paddles. He looked at the monitor next to him, and then he looked at me. "We got her," he said. "We've got a rhythm." I tried to speak. I wanted to ask about the manifest. I wanted to ask if the yard was still there, but all that came out was a wet, choking sound. My lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. The pulmonary embolism, the clot, it was still there, but the system was being forced to work anyway. They were pumping me full of thinners, forcing the cargo through the blockage. Then I felt something small and hard under my left shoulder. I shifted just an inch, and I saw it. The pink plastic toy stethoscope. Chloe. I turned my head. She was sitting in the corner of the room, held back by a female officer. Her eyes were wide. She wasn't crying. She was just staring at me, looking for the manifest, looking to see if her Dr. Mommy was still inside the patient. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say, "Chloe, the stethoscope was wrong. I'm not the doctor. I'm not even the patient. I'm just cargo." They put me on the stretcher. Everything was moving fast. Protocol. Route to Harborview. Priority 1. The sirens were so loud, but underneath the sirens, I could still hear the ticking. I was in the hospital for 6 days. The doctors told my husband it was a miracle. They said I'd been clinically dead for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. They showed me the scans. The blockage in my lungs was massive. By all the rules of the system, I shouldn't have been able to restart. They kept asking me if I saw a light, if I saw my grandmother, if I felt a profound sense of peace. I told them no. I told them I saw a loading bay. I told them I saw the logistics of a tragedy that is happening to millions of women every single day. I told them I saw the master dispatcher. They wrote hypoxic hallucination in my file. They thought I was confused. They thought the lack of oxygen had made my brain misfire. But I'm a coordinator. I know the difference between a misfire and a manifest. I'm home now. I'm sitting in the living room. The carpet is dry. The house is quiet. I keep looking at that pink plastic stethoscope. It's sitting on the coffee table. I can't bring myself to put it back in the toy box. Every time I look at it, I feel the weight of that leaden manifest in my chest. It hasn't gone away. It's a physical sensation. A reminder that I was sent back with a mission I'm still trying to figure out how to execute. I look at my daughter. She's playing with her blocks. She's building a tower. She's so proud of how strong it is, how independent it stands. And I feel this ache, this cracking in my heart. I'm not a preacher. I don't know the right verses. I just know what the yard looks like. I know what the scratching sounds like. I know that the freedom I used to brag about is just a fancy word for a rusted container with the doors welded shut. I'm just sitting here. I'm looking at the clock. Ticking, ticking, ticking. I have the file open. I have the data. But I don't have the words to make them believe me. I just keep holding her hand. I keep trying to show her that there is a different route. A route that requires us to stop trying to be the captain. I don't know how much time is left on the manifest. I just know the latency is over. I'm sitting here with the file open and no next steps.
Linh Phan returned to her life with a medical record that should not exist. The official discharge summary from Harborview Medical Center notes a spontaneous resolution of a massive obstructive pulmonary event following 4 minutes of asystole. In plain language, her heart stopped, her lungs were blocked, and then, without any clinical explanation, the system reset itself. But it's the physical anchor of this story that stays with me, the pink plastic toy stethoscope. For a logistics coordinator, someone who lives and breathes by the integrity of a system, this account creates a specific kind of tension. If we are just complex biological machines, then Lin's vision is a simple glitch, a dying brain using its professional vocabulary to make sense of the dark. But if she's right, if there is a logistics of deception operating in our world, then every claim of independence, every rerouted life, and every self-defined truth is just another link in a chain we can't see until the manifest is signed. Linh Phan still has that toy stethoscope. She doesn't use it to play hospital anymore. She keeps it on her nightstand, a small neon pink reminder of the 4 minutes she spent in the yard of stalled cargo. She says she's waiting for the next dispatch. But mostly, she's just watching her daughter, watching the clock, and holding on to the leaden manifest she can't put down.